All right. So let's talk about these word shifts again. This was this one example. We're trying to compare, and I just have some more calculations I want to go through. I mean, the calculation. So we're comparing after 1980 relative to before 1980 for music lyrics. And that was this example. So we talk about these ideas of word shifts, right? And so here is the plan. We're going to say we have some reference text. So in this case, it was before 1980. Then we have a comparison text. And I'll show you many examples of these things. So I want to go through this in some detail. Okay. This is the right. So we measure the average happiness using this simple-minded thing, right? So once again, it's just we normalize the frequency of words as they appear in a text, multiplied by the average happiness for those words as seen in isolation, and then just score it, right? So which words contribute the most to this change? And it could be that actually they're the same, right? You could actually have even the same happiness scores for two texts, but the words have been moved around, right? People use words in different frequencies. So this is something we've talked about Zipf's law and POX quite a bit. One thing that's not talked about much, and hopefully I'll get into all of this, is how word frequencies change, right? I mean, we obviously, and how those rankings change. Even if you've got two texts and the Zipf's law looks the same for both of them, you could have quite different lineups of words. All right, so which words are contributing most to this change? We say this is either a happier thing or less happy, or maybe it's basically the same. And on the next slide, we'll go through how we do this. But for each word, we're gonna find the contribution to this change, right? So the sum overall change. So for word I, and we've got some set of words, for ANU we have about 1,000, we have 10,000 for other sets. For each word, we're going to figure out how much it changes, how much it contributes to the change in average happiness. And so we'll get to this calculation, but the pieces that we'll end up in here are these are the relative abundances, right? And we call them probabilities of word I in the comparison text, and this is the reference text. This is the average, this is the happiness of the ith word, and then this is a choice we made. This is the reference text, this is its average happiness. So these little symbols will appear over and over, and the idea is this means the word is being used more if this is positive, right? So this is in the comparison text. It's if this is positive, this probability is greater than this one. So there's more of that word in the comparison text. So that's going to be an up. It's going to be down if it's used less. So that's two ways that could go. And the word in question could be happier than the average of the reference text or less happy, and so that's going to be a plus or minus here. And then we're going to we'll turn it into a percentage, there's going to be 100 here, and then we're going to divide by the overall shift in happiness, right? So this is the thing we're trying to figure out, right? This piece here, we're trying to figure out how each word contributes to that shift. So if you sum over all words, then you'll get this total shift, and it will add up to 100. And I'll show you that on the next slide. Yeah. So we're going to have this, right? If we add up these are percentages. We add up the percentage shift. We're either going to get plus or minus 100. It's plus 100 if it's a positive thing, minus 100 if it's a drop. And then what we'll do is we'll just rank the words by their overall contribution, whether it's plus or minus. All right, so we'll work through how we get to this is nothing super complicated, but really this is a normalization here, and it's just this piece we're interested in. All right, so I'll just splash this one up. So this is going to be the game, right? We're looking at this difference, so we're just writing down those things in, hopefully I've got them right. So this is just how we score happiness for the comparison text, how we score happiness for the reference text, right? So this is the happiness of word I, this is its abundance, we're just summing over those things. Yeah? All right, so of course, this is not changing as we go between the texts, right? The score here is not changing. Now you can treat that as well, and that's a more complicated thing, right? So you could have the abundances of things changing And it could be the happiness is changing as well. That could be, we could have something to do with ecologies where this is abundance of, some bird species, and there's some measure about them that we're interested in, but there's something about how that measure changes from decade to decade or whatever it is we're doing. So this could be not stable as well, but in this case it is. And that allows us to do some nice things. So we're just going to put these pieces together. This is a simple thing, right? So here's our probability of comparison of word I in the comparison text and in the reference text. So just putting those things together. And then we're going to do one more, right? So we're going to get to this result that I showed you on the previous slide. So we'll just do one more piece here, and it's down here, right? So this is all of this calculation here. Okay, that's not quite right. So we're going to, let me show you this one thing. So this is, all we have here is, this is the average happiness of the reference text, right? And then the probabilities, the difference in the probabilities. This is a constant, we can just pull it out. So then very simply, you just have a sum of probability minus a sum of probability, which of course is 0. So we can always, this whole thing is 0, we can always add it or subtract it, and that's what we do as we go from here to here. We're going to subtract off this average reference happiness here. So in going from here to here, we've introduced this, and the reason for doing that is now we have, this is either a plus or minus, or possibly 0, but this tells you, is it more or less abundant? And then we have to do something about the happiness of the word, right? We have to sort of reflect on how it's, is it a really positive word or a really negative word? And if we didn't have anything here, this is just a number between 1 and 9, it wouldn't communicate much. So a reasonable thing to do, and you could think of other things, is just to subtract off the average happiness of the reference text, and then we know, is that word more or less happy than that whole that text taken as a whole? Okay. So that's just a little kind of push in there that allows us to kind of make these word shifts and give us some insight. I know these are, there's not a lot of algebra here or whatever, but it's, for some reason, these are sort of complicated things to look at. So, but now we have these two pieces, right? Plus or minus, and plus or minus here. So there are 4 possible ways things could go. Words could be more positive, less positive, more abundant, less abundant, and they'll contribute in different ways. All right. Let's see. Tell me what's going on.
Is your reference text always static?
Yeah, so that's a good, so we have 2 texts. It could be tweets on this day, tweets on another day. It could be the New York Times on a Saturday, New York Times on a Tuesday. We just decide it's not symmetric. So what we're going to say is we're starting with this one, and we want to see why this one is happier or sadder. If you swap them, then you get a slightly different arrangement. It's not completely symmetric. You could do something where you say, let's subtract off the average of the averages, right, halfway between them. But it becomes a little less interpretable. Yeah. First of all, you kind of realize you should do something, but then you could do, there are a number of possible choices. You could put 5 here, because that's the neutral point, which would mean, is it a positive word, or is it a fundamentally positive or negative word? So that would have an interpretability to it. But this is always moving around depending on what your reference text is. So if you have a really positive reference text, then most words are going to seem to bring it down. So that's going to have an odd effect. If you had a really, really positive one, then words that are also positive could still bring it down because they're not like, right? Yeah. Like you're still using positive words, but you're not using like super awesome crazy words, right? So they will appear in a way that you think, oh, that's a little odd. These positive words are actually dragging the thing down. It's just that they're not as super psyched. Yeah. Does that make? So that's the calculation behind these things. And there is this extra, as I said, nice thing that you can think about here. Make some little trapezoids actually about what happens if you have variable scores. And I know we're just doing happiness, but this is in principle anything you want. You can fit entropy here, other pieces. Okay, so this is a page we don't have to go through too much, but these are the combinations of these things that you'll see these little gadgets, right? So this means this is a relatively negative word being used more, so it's going to depress it. Up the top is a relatively positive word being used more, and that's going to lift up the comparison text. And then these are slightly more ambiguous ones, right? So this is a negative word being used less, so that's going to mean that the comparison text is doing a little bit better. This is a positive word that's being used less, and that's going to hurt the comparison text, right? And of course, these are all relatively negative, relatively positive, relatively negative. Yeah. So you'll see them. There's lots of extra information in these little plots.